This is R2 2013 Common Issues webinar presented by Perry Johnson Registrars. Today we'll be talking about the most common issues that our auditors have been finding in the field. So in this webinar we'll be detailing the most commonly encountered R2 2013 related issues. We'll be delving deep into the standard and clarifying some of the most pressing R2 concerns from the viewpoint of both auditors and R2 certified organizations. Now, I'm presenting today from Perry Johnson's world headquarters here in Troy, Michigan. It's a beautiful, crisp day outside. I am Tony Kropinski. I am an environmental health and safety specialist here at Perry Johnson and a member of the executive committee. I'm currently lead auditor for quality standard, environmental health and safety, R2, RIOS, Body Armor 9000, and the medical device standard 1345. So today's session is about an hour. We're going to use about 40 minutes to get into the standard a little bit, talk about some of these common issues, and then the last 15-20 minutes or so we'll deal with some basics of getting R2 certified and some questions that you might have. Now, all the participants here attending are on mute, so if you have any questions, I can't hear you, just look at your screen there on the right. There's a question dialog box where you can type your questions, and I can answer those a little bit later towards the end of the presentation. Again, my contact information will be up at the end of the presentation, along with this PowerPoint will be available. Both the audio and just the PowerPoint slides will be available after the presentation on our website, pgr.com. So check that out if you need additional information. Also, you can contact me. Okay, so a little bit about Perry Johnson. Perry Johnson Registrars is an accredited certification body, and we offer and grant certification for numerous standards. ISO 9000, which is obviously the most popular quality management system standard, and the environmental management system standard, which is ISO 14001. OSAS 18001, which most of our recyclers are familiar with. We also do aerospace like AS 9100 and some TS as well. Obviously, we offer R2, we offer eStewards and RIOS, and among other standards. So PGR is listed on the IAR.org, an Industry Association of Accredited Registrars website. We rank as the #1 registrar in the world right now with the most leading in certifications. So countries where PGR has certified companies to include Canada, United States, and Mexico, recently in Brazil, overseas in the Netherlands, and in the Far East there, Australia, India, and China as well. So if you have any additional information that's needed, you can always contact PGR at pgr.com or give us a call to get any specific questions answered. Now, a little bit about SERI. SERI is the Sustainable Electronic Recycling International organization, a relatively new organization that's holding the R2 standard now. This has changed from R2 responsible recycling being the home of the standard. Now SERI is the new home. SERI's mission is to promote safe and stable electronic reuse and recycling worldwide. The core focus is essentially administering and continually improving the R2 standard. We had the revision from 2008 here to 2013, and their goal is to be a leader, premier global environmental leader, setting work and health and safety standards for electronic and refurbishing and recycling industry, and have certified over 500 facilities that are currently R2 certified in 17 different countries. So if you have any additional information that you need, check out sustainableelectronics.org. That's the SERI website. They have the standards up there free, along with guidance documentation and other supplemental modules which they're developing at this time, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So the main content of today's webinar is to discuss Provision 5, which is dealing with focus materials, downstream vendor management, due diligence. We'll additionally be talking about the R2 provision 6, which is reusable equipment and components. Get into a little bit of speculative accumulations with CRT regulations, which has been in the news recently, and specifically with the provision 11, which is dealing with the closure plan, where facility abandonment has been kind of a big issue and needs to be addressed seriously by our auditors in the field, making sure that the requirements of the standard are conformed to. So we'll kind of be going through requirements and some guidance for this provision 11, financial instruments to consider, and then we'll finish up with Series R2 logo change updates, which they put some updates on their website, but I'll kind of go over those now a little bit towards the end of the presentation. And the Series Witness program, which launched this first quarter here in February, which we'll talk about what Series up to here with the Witness program and how it will affect recyclers. Okay, so R2's provision 6, reusable equipment and components. One of the major changes to the R2 standard was this new labeling requirement for reusable equipment. Provision 6 requires all items for resale be clearly labeled with one of 3 designations. So you have the first one here, which is tested for full functions, R2 ready for reuse. Second category, tested for key functions, R2 ready for resale. And lastly, evaluated non-functioning, R2 ready for repair. So these are the 3 categories when we're talking about reusable equipment that labeling must be of this verbiage to conform with the standard effectively. So all items, regardless of the category for reuse, must be covered by, and this is directly from the standard, by a quality assurance plan. The only exception to this quality assurance plan would be if the organization is maintaining a current certification to either ISO 9001, the quality management system, or RIO certification, which is the Recycling Industry Operational Standard. Both of those would satisfy the requirement instead of having a quality assurance plan in place. For facilities that aren't ISO 9 or RIO, recyclers for reused items must have a quality assurance plan in place. All these items, regardless of category, also need to be wiped of all data. So data destruction processes need to be effectively maintained for those items going for reuse. So speaking to this labeling requirement, each sale must be accompanied by at least one document that includes appropriate labeling. So this means every shipment, not every item. So items that are destined for reuse, resale, repair must be labeled in this way using the language of the R2 standard, which we talked about on the previous slide. So we can't use some coding system or color coding I've seen in some of the facilities I visited where you have a blue label meaning that this is going to reuse, a red label meaning it's going to repair. We can't use those. We have to use specific R2 language that's spelled out in the standard. So let's talk a little bit about these categories. Okay, so the tested full function R2 ready for reuse category is essentially a new product. It's essentially what you would receive directly from a manufacturer. It's basically an equivalent to a new product. It's ready to go out of the box. You take it out, plug it in, you're good to go. It has legally licensed software and an operating system. All the hardware drivers have been up to date, and the full functionality, primary, secondary function, have been effectively tested. Additionally, cosmetic defects have been evaluated as well, and this is a product that is ready to go for reuse. Essentially, like I said, is ready to go out of the box. Looks like a brand new product for the most part. Okay, so this is different from items that are tested for key function, R2 ready for resale. These are items that are basically tested for key functions, primary, secondary functions. Maybe you have a laptop, for example, that's working fine, battery life is okay, there might be a few cosmetic defects, but the camera is not working on this item. That is a secondary function as long as there is a clear disclosure of the defects in writing to the purchaser. It's very clear, there's no misleading, we have good transparency in the process. And the cosmetic defects are repairable. This would satisfy the requirements for items in this resale category. So this is tested for key function. All the key functions are there and functional, but we may have some secondary functions and cosmetic issues that it's okay, but needs to be disclosed as mentioned to the purchaser. Okay. The last category has to do with evaluated and non-functioning equipment R2 ready for repair. This is equipment that's is economically feasible to repair. Maybe the resale value exceeds the cost of repair. So it's economically okay to go in this stream, and the items that are labeled as such can be repaired with persons or facilities with the appropriate tools and the appropriate qualified personnel to actually fix this. So going to refurbishers that can fix this. And we'll talk a little bit about downstream due diligence and how it affects this particular category, because it does, and what things need to be looked for. But obviously we need to send material from our site to a downstream refurbisher that can have the ability, or does have the ability, to fix this equipment and repair this equipment or recycle it according to our focused material management plan. Now, R2 ready for repair equipment may only be sold to refurbishers or resellers qualified to test the equipment and recycle the FM's focused material according to provision 6C3B. Okay? If these two requirements are not met, the equipment must be recycled. Now, pointing to the guidance document, there's a note in the guidance document, section 622, that talks about exceptions to provision 5. Now, downstream vendor due diligence does not have to be performed on buyers purchasing material that meets the requirements of tested full functioning for reuse or tested for key functioning R2 ready for resale equipment. So those first two categories for reuse and resale are exempt from what we'll see the downstream vendor due diligence requirements. Now, provision 5, however, does apply and is required on all buyers of this category, evaluated and non-functioning R2 ready for repair items. That material needs to go to a downstream vendor that's been properly vetted according to what we'll see here, provision 5, which is the downstream vendor due diligence requirements. Okay. So additional detail, back to the reuse, can be found in the guidance document. I'd refer you to that. But if you have any questions, please let me know with regard to reuse. We don't have time to cover all the details, but I just wanted to go through some of the basic labeling requirements and some of the exemptions in certain cases. But we'll turn our attention now to another hot topic. This is one that many of our clients have had a lot of difficulty with in terms of what meets the threshold for downstream vendor due diligence. The standard explicitly lays out several items, and we'll see in which cases they do or do not apply. But the general principle for this R2 provision 5 is that an R2 2013 electronic recycler shall manage, both on-site and in the selection of downstream vendors, the focused materials that pass through its facility of control in a manner that's protective of worker health and safety, public health, and the environment. So an R2 electronic recycler shall also perform due diligence on downstream vendors to which it ships these materials. Okay, FMs, for if anybody is not familiar with the R2 standard, are polychlorinated biphenyl-containing items like lamps and ballasts, mercury-containing items like LCD screens, cathode ray tube type TVs that have both circuit boards and leaded glass, phosphorus that needs to be dealt with, batteries. Whole and shredded circuit boards would fall under this category as well. So these FMs need to be handled appropriately by the facility that they're passing through, and through subsequent facilities all the way to the end of life. So let's take a little closer look here on what are the possible scenarios we might run into. And again, this has been the source of many major nonconformances, not understanding this requirement clearly. So I would strongly suggest all recyclers to make sure they have a copy of the standard and that they read that copy of the standard, specifically provision 5, section E, subsections 1 through 7, which we're gonna kind of get into right now. But there's two possible scenarios for focus materials coming through your R2 certified organization. They're going to be processed and either shipped to a downstream R2 certified organization, which is here on the left here. This green indicates that they're R2 certified, or they're going to be shipped down to a non-R2 certified organization. Now, the requirements for due diligence are different based on whether you're sending focus materials to a downstream vendor that's R2 2013 certified versus non-R2 certified. Less due diligence is required per provision 5G in the standard if you're sending your FMs to a recycler that's R2 certified. Full due diligence is required, however, if you're going to be sending your FMs to a non-R2 certified organization. The full conformance with provision 5E, sections 1 through 7, and 5F is required. Let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. But first, the easy way, obviously, is to select, if possible, it's not always possible, a downstream vendor that is R2 certified. So if you're shipping in materials, focus materials, to the downstream vendor that's R2 certified, you need to verify, or auditors will verify conformance to sections only 5E1 and 5E6. Okay, so auditors that are coming on site are going to ask for a couple things. They're going to ask, did you, as a recycler that is sending FMs to another R2 recycler, did you conform that the FM management plan, how you handle your FMs, is also how those items are handled downstream? So 5E1 basically says, does the downstream vendor conform to your recycling focus material management plan? So some evidence has to be provided that you were able to, maybe you obtained their FM plan and compared it, and that the FMs are being handled in an appropriate fashion according to and in conformance with the R2 2013 standard. The second part of this is essentially provision 7, which 5E6 talks about, which is tracking throughput. So documentation has to be obtained to show that this downstream recycler is handling materials and sending it to other downstream vendors, and there's got to be a transparent basically flow through the recycling chain. So we should know where this material is going. Bills of lading and shipping documentation should be obtained, and that's what auditors will be looking for to evaluate your conformance to this provision. Auditors will also be looking for you obtaining R2 certs. So you should be having on file current R2 2013 certificates for those vendors that you're sending material to, if they're obviously R2 certified. You should be checking if those R2 certs are valid. You can do that by checking the SERI website or by calling the certification body like PJR. You can call us and we can tell you if that cert's valid. The cert should be valid, and that organization should be in good standing, meaning that they don't really have any suspensions of that certificate. There are fake certificates out there. I really haven't run into anything for R2, but certainly for ISO 9 and things like that, you do run into fake certificates. Certification bodies, auditors, and yourself should do proper due diligence to make sure that those certificates are actually valid and that they're current. And you should be looking at these certificates or this information on pretty much an annual basis, on a regular frequency. So that's the basic requirements, a little bit less due diligence that's required if you're sending it to an R2 certified organization. Now what if you're sending these FMs to an organization that is non-R2 certified. So the full due diligence requirements of Provision 5E, Sections 1 through 7, and 5F apply. Okay, so the first part of this is 5E1, which is again conforming to the recycler's FM management plan. Then second to that, there's adherence to a documented system to manage environmental health and safety risks and legal requirements. So these downstream vendors that are non-R2 certified, it's helpful, as we'll see in a second, if they are ISO 14 or 18 certified, or OSAS 18001 certified, meaning they have a certified environmental health and safety management system in place and it's effectively implemented, which can be checked easily if you have those certs. You need to, if they're not ISO 14 or OSAS 18001 certified, the due diligence becomes a little bit more increased. You might have to go on site to verify that they have an environmental health and safety management system in place. Additionally, with regard to legal requirements, you have to obtain a list of legal requirements to see that this downstream vendor is maintaining environmental health and safety legal requirements and is in conformance with the standard and is compliant with those environmental permits. You should be obtaining wastewater discharge or air emission permits, ensuring that those are current and valid with those downstream vendors is the way to go about seeing if they're in compliance with applicable environmental health and safety legal requirements. So first getting that legal list, and then looking at that legal list to see what permits are required and obtaining copies of each of those permits. Auditors should be going through this basic checklist here, Provision 5E 1 through 7, saying yes, they looked at the FM plan, they have it, they have a documented management system in place, it's certified or not, but at least they have one. Then going through a list of legal and looking at some of the permits, environmental permits, making sure they're current and valid. Number 4 here, 5E4. So conformance to Section E, which is what we're talking about here, and Section F. So Section F talks about confirming at least annually through audits or similar effective means that each downstream vendor being sent FMs conforms to this Section E 1 through 5. We're going to talk about kind of how to go about evaluating whether you need to do an on-site audit of a downstream vendor. In some cases you will, in some cases you won't. There's some guidance on that in Appendix C of the guidance document, which we'll get to here in a moment. But essentially, if the risks are high and you can't really get a good sense through the documentation review or desk audit that this organization has an environmental health and safety program and is meeting legal requirements, you will most likely have to go on site to see that they have these things implemented and that they are in place effectively. So the last 3 items here, Section 5E5, 6, and 7, speak to provisions 6, 7, and 10, which is reuse, which we talked about already, throughput tracking, making sure that we have documented evidence and transparency for each recycler down the recycling chain to end of life, where this material is going, who's handling it, what FM streams are going where. Transparency is really the key. It's kind of the point of R2 is to say this is where it's going and it's being recycled or handled in a responsible way. So conformance to Provision 10, physical security, we want to ensure and have evidence. Again, stress that we need to have something documented that states that they have a security protocol in place, or they have security cameras or fence. So either you're going on site to verify that they have those items in place, or you have some sort of documented evidence that provides you security that there is physical security at this place that you're sending the material to. Okay. Okay. So let's take a look at some possible scenarios here with some of the downstream vendors. The first one here, Tier 1 and 2, all the way to the left, right? Your organization, we're sending an FM stream, sending it downstream to, in the first case, all the way to the left here, this green box indicates that it's an R2 certified organization. Now, what requirements do we need to do to do our due diligence what information do we need? So again, for an R2 certified organization here that's a Tier 1, we just need to obtain evidence that the FM plan is in conformance with the R2 standard, and they're handling the FMs in accordance with our FM management plan. Now for the Tier 2s, we have one that's R2 certified and one that's not. Now due diligence stops here at Tier 1. Because they're R2 2013 certified and we've obtained the FM plan, it's in accordance with what we need to do and what the R2 standard says we need to do, and we've got throughput tracking to say this is where this material is going, we don't have to do our due diligence and gather any information on these Tier 2 other than knowing that this material from the Tier 1 is going to these Tier 2s. Okay? So the due diligence chain essentially stops here at Tier 1. For the items here in the middle, for this recycling chain in the middle, we have the first tier being a non-R2 certified organization. That is subsequently sending material to FMs to a Tier 2, one of which is certified to R2 and one of which is not. So again, these two, the Tier 1 here in red and the Tier 2 in red, need to have complete due diligence, full due diligence performed. So that means meeting all the requirements and in conformance with section provision 5E1 through 7 and 5F. So this Tier 3 non-R2 certified vendor does not, we just need to know, we just need to know that material is going there, but that recycling, the due diligence chain here stops at this Tier 2 facility here in green. Okay, so the last scenario here all the way to the right, we have an R2 non-certified, or sorry, it's the non-R2 certified facility that's receiving focus materials from your organization. We will need to perform full due diligence on the Tier 1, all Tier 2, which is there's 2 of here listed. And then when that splits off here, we're sending the material from a non-R2 to an R2 certified organization. The Tier 4 receivers here that are receiving FMs do not require full due diligence because we have an upstream R2 certified recycler here at Tier 3. However, we need all the ones on the left side of this tree need to have full due diligence performed all the way to end of life here, which it looks like end of life is Tier 4. So again, hopefully it's not confusing. So there's kind of a process you should have in place to effectively evaluate downstream vendor due diligence. Siri on their website, they have published some checklists that aren't required to be used but could be helpful. So check it out, but they essentially talk about what equipment is being sent where, and what are going through an evaluation of the processing technique. So if you have desktops going downstream, right, there's going to be processing techniques like manual disassembly, shredding, mercury retorting, in some cases with the LCD screens, and etc. So you want to make sure you're going through and understanding what's happening to the material. And beyond that, making sure you have proper due diligence and documenting due diligence as needed. Again, we won't get into import-export compliance very much, but that's another issue. You got to make sure that you're having proper documentation, that you're sending your FMs to, if it's to another country, that it's an OECD country that's legally allowed to accept that material. And that should be a part of your due diligence documentation, that you have those things on file. Some of the major questions you should be asking during the desktop audit or an on-site audit is what we'll get into next. So first, though, how do we know whether to do an on-site audit of these downstream vendors, or should we just do a desktop audit? So this is from the guidance document. It's Appendix C that Siri had put out, and it's basically a decision tree. This is not auditable, so auditors cannot hold you to this decision tree, but it's a good guidance that provides some understanding of when we should do a site audit and go on site to these facilities and see what they're up to make sure that we have the necessary documentation information to say that they are conforming to the provisions in the standard here. So we have a downstream vendor here that's R2 certified. So if they are R2 certified, the site audit is not required. Again, we just need to do a couple things. Tracking throughput documentation needs to be obtained, and again, we need to make sure that the R2 certified organization has a currently valid R2 certification from a certification body. If they're not R2 certified, we need to go down to see essentially if they're RIO certified or they're ISO 14000 or OSAS 18000 certified. So each step of the way here, we're basically doing a risk assessment and saying, oh, okay, they're RIO certified. If yes, do they have further downstream processes or downstream vendors under them that are receiving materials? If yes, we need to go back kind of to the beginning and go through the process to do a risk assessment. But essentially, if they're RIO certified and there's not any additional downstream processing, then a site audit's not required. Going across to the right here, if they're not RIO certified but they have a environmental health and safety management system that's certified, then we will not need to do a site audit depending on what's going on with the downstreams here. Okay, so if they have those certifications in place, the risks are minimized, no site audit is required. So going even further, the last one here they talk about ISO 9 certified. If they're not ISO 9 certified, then you need some supporting documentation to see how FM plan is implemented, and most likely you're going to have to go on site here to see what they're up to. So the burden of evidence is on the recycler to show what the process was that you went through to determine whether these facilities needed to have on-site audits or desktop audits. The on-site audit is not required unless your risk assessment essentially dials you into the fact that you need to go on site to make sure that the processes and the conformance to provision 5.1 through 7, provision 5E 1 through 7 is being adhered to. Okay. So moving on, the closure plan, which is provision 11, and that provision talks about insurance, the closure plan, and financial responsibility. This has been a big issue recently with auditors at various certification bodies finding large accumulations, speculative accumulations of materials like CRTs. Facility abandonment has been an issue. People just picking up and taking off and leaving hundreds of thousands of tons of CRTs just to be dealt with by somebody else. So the closure plan should effectively address this, and the general principle states that the R2 2013 electronic recycler shall possess insurance that is adequate to cover the potential risk and liabilities associated with the nature and size of the facility's operations, and shall have adequate legal and financial assurances in place for the proper closure of its facility. Now, again, this is to control for these speculative accumulations of CRTs, and make sure to review, we're not going to go in detail, but CRT regulations, they're not considered solid or hazardous waste when they're going for reuse or recycling, but they have to be handled in specific ways. So review CFR 40 subpart E for additional details. Now, the requirements, Part A here of Provision 11 talks about R2 2013 electronic recycler shall be able to demonstrate that it has evaluated the risk arising from certification activities. Okay, that risk assessment should be performed by a qualified individual. It doesn't necessarily have to be outsourced if you have someone on site that can do an adequate job and is competent. And once it's determined what the level of risk is, do you have adequate insurance or reserve to cover liabilities? This might include environmental pollution, worker health and safety that arise from operations, and site mitigation. So Part B of Provision 11 talks to recyclers shall develop and maintain current written plan and sufficient financial instrument that assures proper closure of the facility and assurance against abandonment. We are looking for a written plan. Auditors should be looking for a written plan that safeguards against abandonment of the facility. So financial instruments must be assigned to an independent party or corporate parent, right? Risks need to be identified. Again, the risk assessment should have been conducted, and essentially, you have to take into account reasonable foreseeable costs of the processing of the remaining material on site. If there's any environmental sampling that needs to be conducted due to contamination, and site remediation activities to essentially restore the property to a sellable, leasable condition. Those all need to be accounted for in the written plan. Closure plan also should consider the risks identified, which we talked about in Section A, and assign responsibility for these activities that need to take place after closure. So some general guidance. The appropriate risk assessment should be conducted by a qualified individual. Again, this evaluation needs to be documented, and again, does not need to be conducted by an outsourced person. It could be someone internal, but competency requirements for that individual should be defined, and they should be appropriate to the level of risk with the facility. Again, the closure plan should contain some general specific items here, with established timelines for closure, who is the responsible party for what part of the closure plan, and preparations for facility closure and abandonment. Again, worst case scenario is what our auditors should be looking for. Now, a word about pollution liability insurance. If a risk assessment is effectively conducted and it's determined that there is no pollution liability insurance required, that's okay. Documentation just needs to be reviewed at the audit to determine that that's how the determination was made. So in the United States, however, though, just as a side note, minimum adequate level of commercial liability insurance is about $1 million in the U.S. But in other countries it may be different, so make sure just to look into specific details if you're located outside the United States. So again, with the recent news, this is something that our auditors will be looking for, and it's been a source of confusion. We want to make sure that there's adequate funds to cover the cost of processing remaining inventory. The materials you have on site cannot be used as a part of the closure plan's financial instrument. Equipment, however, selling off equipment can be. Also ensure that you include the cost of cleanup, as mentioned before, to return the facility to a leasable, sellable condition. Some of the financial instruments to consider would be a letter of credit, surety bond, restricted funds, and there's got to be a clear person designated, and that person needs to have access to the financial instrument, and there should be verification in writing that this individual or party is the responsible party, and there should be written documentation that that they have access and have accepted this responsibility. So getting into some basics. There's been some changes, obviously, with the revision to the R2 standard. Now, from the R2 2008 to the R2 2013, there's the new logo. The effective deadline is May 31st, 2015 for changes to promotional material, marketing material like business cards that display the leaf logo. The leaf logo is no longer used, or can be no longer used after May 31st, 2015. So come June 1st, auditors will be looking for adherence to this requirement, because it's part of your legal and other requirements that you subscribe to when you're an R2 certified organization. Websites, however, need to be updated immediately with the new logo if you're R2 2013 certified. And again, auditors should be checking into this. More information can be found at the SERI website, sustainableelectronics.org. There is a code of practice document that speaks to some of the logo usage requirements that SERI has put out that can be found on the website as well. Okay. Recently, there has been a witness program put in place from SERI, and that was essentially launched this past February, I believe. And some of the goals associated with this witness program would be to ensure that our auditors are all on the same page, that they're consistent and accurate among the different certification bodies like Perry Johnson. SERI wants to do a better job with this witness program of identifying areas where training and guidance is needed for auditors and recyclers to better help us and better help you put a thumb on trouble spots. Witness audits right now are only occurring during regular scheduled R2 audits. There are randomly selected R2 recyclers and auditors representing essentially a cross-section of the facilities that are certified. There is another program that will be, I believe, the next newsletter that from SERI will be discussing, which has to do with spot audits that are a little bit more random, that SERI will be conducting to get a good sampling of what's out there, how auditors are conducting themselves. Are auditors up to speed on the R2 requirements? Are the audits being conducted and effectively completed? So more on this, again, check the SERI website for more details. Okay, so let's lastly talk about, we got about just over 15 minutes left, getting R2 certified. So some of the key benefits of certification and implementation of the R2 standard is promotion of safe and effective recovery, reuse of electronic equipment, guards towards downstream controls of recycling chain, which we talked about today, which is one of the major problems, understanding what are the requirements there and the threshold for requirements. Minimize environmental and public health risks, compliance with domestic and international laws, especially when transboundary shipments are occurring with focused materials. There's certain regulations that have to be upheld. Minimizing liability and encouraging reduced insurance costs for recyclers, which is a benefit of recyclers that have been R2 certified. And assisting OEMs with their due diligence for their end-of-life electronics. And lastly, with the green movement, it instills a sense of public confidence through the third-party certification bodies coming in and saying that this facility is R2 certified and conducts themselves in accordance with the provisions of the R2 standard. Okay, so the PGR's basic certification steps. Before you contact us, or it's helpful to contact us as early as you can in the process so that we can help get you ready and let you know what sort of documentation requirements are needed before we get started. But the essential basic steps are implementing and getting the system implemented into the organization, training to the standard requirements, getting your staff understanding R2 requirements and what the R2 standard means to them and what are the things they have to change now to be in conformance with the standard. So training requirements are put in place. Internal audits have to be conducted on your various processes through the organization to ensure that your system has been checked. Additionally, with the requirement now, 14 and 18 are required. You don't need 14 and 18 through the same certification body, but if you're going to be R2 2013, you need to be certified to both 14 and 18. These standards, along with ISO 9001, are currently undergoing some major revisions, as some of you may have heard. We have additional webinars on ISO 9000, one that's occurring here in April 15th, on the basic ease of transition to the new ISO 9001 2015 standard. That will be on April 15th and May 13th. Let's see. Additionally, there's going to be updates on the ISO 14000 revision in a webinar that will be conducted May 6th here of 2015. So make sure to sign up for those webinars. They'll contain some additional information on the revisions. Just to speak to OSAS 18001, that standard's also going through revisions to become ISO 45001. So the health and safety standards are undergoing change. So there's big changes to be had. So keep up to date with current webinars that PGR is offering to stay up to date with changes. So once you get your staff trained, you look at integrating your systems. You need to implement the requirements. So conducting the internal audits, conducting a compliance evaluation, and doing basic review of the system. Looking at your findings from the internal audit and making some necessary changes to correct those through your corrective action process. At that point, I mean, you should have already contacted CB, but contacting your certification body like Perry Johnson will assist you and walk you through the process and get you scheduled to complete your registration audit, which is S1, S2, which is your Stage 1 and Stage 2 audits. So once you get your Stage 1 and Stage 2 audits and address nonconformities, if any, that were brought up during those audits, then you get your certificate to your R2 2013. A little more detail. So your initial registration audit consists of 2 stages. The Stage 1, as mentioned, is a basic audit. It's usually a day or so. It could be more. And it's an on-site document review of your management system. Auditors will be coming on site and looking at your internal audit, seeing whether it was done effectively, implemented, and meets the requirements of the standard, looking at your management review inputs and outputs, looking at some of the basic documentation requirements and operational controls that should be put in place to mitigate potential environmental health and safety risks, among other documents. But essentially, this Stage 1 evaluates your readiness of your organization to move to Stage 2. So pending a good Stage 1 audit and closing some of the issues, non-conforming issues from Stage 1, you'll move on and be accepted to do your Stage 2 audit, which is typically scheduled 30 to 75 days after Stage 1. It's good to give a little bit of room between the Stage 1 and Stage 2 audits so that you can correct the necessary issues. Any issues, particularly with downstream vendor due diligence, that aren't fully documented and you're not in conformance, could result in a major finding. So a good solid Stage 1 and then some time after your Stage 1 to collect yourself and implement the necessary changes is always a good bet to have a really good successful Stage 2 with little nonconformities. So when we come on to do a Stage 2, this is going to cover all the site's processes. It's an on-site audit. It's usually a couple days depending on your risk level and the number of employees, and it will look at your entire management system. Nonconformities that are discovered or written up during the Stage 2 will need to be resolved prior to issuing certificates. The findings generally come in 2 flavors: minor findings and major findings. Minors are just some minor gaps in the system, nonconformances to some of the clauses of the standard, whereas a major would be a complete breakdown of the system. In downstream due diligence, again, like we talked about, some of the reuse issues are the big items. Closure plan, those are the main issues that have surfaced recently. So once you're certified and you've completed your Stage 1 and 2, you'll go on to a set of surveillance audits, which are a little shorter. They're not going to cover all the processes at your facility, but these are scheduled either at 6 or 12-month intervals depending on the contract type. Usually they're annual. So you'll have after your Stage 2 is done a year later, you'll have your annual Surveillance 1 audit, and then a year later you'll have your annual Surveillance 2 audit. After those 2 partial system audits are completed over the year or 2, you'll have a recertification audit, 3rd year, that basically covers the entire system. And then once you're good to go with the recertification, you'll get another 3-year certificate which will continue with your surveillance visits. Okay. Again, if you have any questions regarding the certification process, do not hesitate to contact us. We can walk you through the process and get you some quotes if needed. If you're interested in taking some R2 Rios Lead Auditor courses, or you're an internal auditor and need some further assistance with the standard, we offer a very economically priced course, which is an accredited online R2 Lead Auditor course and Lead Auditor Transition course. This is accredited by Siri. It's roughly an 8-hour work at your own pace course. The course is pretty straightforward. It's, videos, some PowerPoints, and there's some quizzes, and a passing score will get you a certification. That's good forever. And the course is about $295 for the Lead Auditor course and $195 for the Transition course. Okay, we also have Rios courses. So if you go to pgr.com on the lower right, or I think it's on the left side of the screen, you can sign up for those courses there. And again, they're work at your own pace courses. Okay, so let's take a moment here. We have a few minutes left and see if there's any questions. Let me take a look here through the questions if there is any. And I'll get with you in one moment. So we do have one question that's dealing with being asked to share downstream audit information. For transparency, R2 requires that the information be transparent and that you share this information. There are subtle ways around some of the documentation requirements, but for all intents and purposes, for full downstream vendor due diligence, you need to have what we talked about earlier with provision 5, section E 1 through 7 fulfilled. Okay. So I hope that answers your question. So essentially, yes, you need to have that information be transparent and through the process down to end of life. See if there's any other questions here. So we have one other question that are we in the process of certifying brokers? Yeah, brokers are kind of a special circumstance. We do certify brokers. I haven't personally certified any brokers, but I've done some executive committee reviews on brokerage firms, and so they can be R2 certified. There are some challenges, obviously, with certifying an R2 broker, but it is done and can be done. Some of the clauses, provisions in the standard are going to be non-applicable to brokerage firms, but yes, this is possible. Okay, I'll just give a minute here. See if there's any additional questions that need to be answered. Again, if I didn't answer your question, then make sure to shoot me an email. I'll put up my contact information. So here's my contact information, and if I'm not available, there's times when I'm out auditing. Scott Jones, who is the program manager, can also address your questions that are R2, 1418, anything environmental health and safety related. I just also want to speak to, we have an upcoming webinar on energy management systems on April 22nd for 50,001. Be sure to check that out if you're interested. See if there's any other questions. So there was an additional question regarding the brokerages, certifying brokers. How would you audit them with regards to downstream? The downstream requirements are going to be similar in that you have to have transparency in the documentation for where the material from the upstream to the downstream vendors are going. If you are a broker and you are coming in essentially contact or handling FM related material, it's your responsibility to do effective due diligence on the facilities that are receiving these FMs. So the requirements are essentially the same. Hope that answers that question. So again, if there's any questions that you guys have or you need to talk to somebody, myself or Scott Jones is available to answer your questions. Just give us a call here at Perry Johnson. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I don't see any additional questions at this time, so this will conclude our R2 2013 Common Issues webinar. I hope it was helpful for you. Again, this was not all-inclusive. We just wanted to go through some of the major issues that we seem to be finding on a recurring basis with some of our certified recyclers, what our auditors are saying that they're seeing again and again, and provide some clarity on these requirements. So give us some feedback if you thought the webinar was helpful. Or if you needed to know something else, please share that information so we can help you get certified or help you implement a better system. Thank you everyone for your attending the webinar, and check the PGR website often for additional upcoming webinars. Thank you. Have a good day.